Thank you. Thank you very much. I tell you, it's wonderful to be here in your church and to talk about the subject of marriage, because I'm qualified to speak on marriage, because I've been married a long time to a lovely lady, and she could have left me a long time ago if she hadn't been a lovely lady. And I believe I'm qualified because the first 11 years of my marriage was BC, before Jesus, before Christ, before conversion, before change in my life. My wife lived with me 11 years before Jesus was my Savior. These last many years have been precious. January the 18th, 1947, I responded with an I do to this kind of a thing. Listen to me. Will you, Bob Harrington, take Joyce Compton to be your lawful wedded wife, to live together after the ceremony in the holy state of matrimony? And will you love her, honor her, and keep her in sickness or in health, in poverty or in wealth, for better or for worse? And will you keep thee only unto her as long as ye both shall live? So help you God. And I said to that, I do. Have you ever said an I do to that statement? Did you really mean it? When the time comes for you to say I do to that, will you really mean it? I think today man's word needs to be upgraded. When you say things today, I think it's important to remember what you've said and to whom you said what you did. A man's word used to be his bond. Nowadays, a man's word is not even taken by those that work with him and love him like a man's word ought to be. I want all you young people to listen to Bob Harrington tonight like you've never listened to a preacher before, because your marriage in the future could be better because of what you do in the present by getting your past forgiven and your future in the hands of the Lord. Now, we're going to talk about a thing called marriage, and we're going to discuss these different aspects of marriage. Are you old enough? Now, that doesn't have anything to do about 18, 19, 20, 30, 40. Are you old enough to be married? Are you old enough to say I do? All right, we'll talk about that. Then we're going to discuss how to be happily married. We're going to choose the fact that making the right mate your decision. If you've already married and you think you got the wrong mate, we're going to talk about how to repair that man instead of replace him, and how to repair that woman instead of replace her. Seemingly today, if you don't like one another, you don't try to repair it, you just try to remove it by replacing it. And seemingly sometimes you bring in a bigger problem than you got rid of when you moved the other one out. So we want to talk tonight also about, is your marriage on the rocks or is your marriage on the rock? We'll talk about those things tonight. Now listen to me right now as I take my Bible. That's a good book to take when it comes to marriage, because this is where marriage came from. Marriage was ordained of God in heaven and not in Las Vegas, and not in Hollywood, and not on national television, and not with the newspapers of the Dear Abby or the Ann Landers or the Joyce Brothers or the Margaret Meads. Marriage was ordained in heaven of God, by God, that marriage might be holy. Say that word, holy. Say it again, holy. Most marriages I know today are hellish because they are not based on holiness. Marriage should be a holy state, so saith the Lord. When Paul was writing to the church at Corinth, they were having a lot of marriage problems in those days, just like we're having today. 25% of all marriages today are second marriages, because nearly 50% of all first marriages end in divorce. I wonder why. I think today America needs preaching about marriage more than any other subject other than salvation. Instead of thinking about the heaven we go into and the sweet by and by, we ought to have a good marriage in the nasty now and now, so that our kids can identify with a home instead of a house, and a marriage that's holy instead of hellish. How many glad you've come so far? Raise your hand, let's see. We vote quite often. We got some couples in here tonight that are married and just here to see if this message is going to help them. Well, it's going to help you because it's going to help me. Paul wrote to the group at Corinth, and he said over at the 8th verse of that 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, charity never faileth. That's love. That's love. Say that word, love. Love. Love never faileth. I tell you, if most of our marriages today had more love in them, they wouldn't be failing. See, God doesn't ordain a marriage to be a flop. The reason a marriage is a flop, you leave love out. You put your personality in instead of God's personality in your love. God doesn't ordain a marriage or church or business to be a flop. The reason most of us are flop today is we are in a floppy condition instead of a godly condition. Love never faileth, but whether there be prophecy, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, then we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Listen to that. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. If you want to know the base of most marriage failures today, one or the other, the man or the woman, is still a child. Now, there might be a 40-year-old child, a gray-headed child, might be a beautiful woman child, but Paul said when you grow up, you're supposed to put away childish things. Look what he said, for now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, charity, that's love, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Now let me talk to you a little bit about some stages of love that people grow through in this thing called life. Because stages of love are very, very good and very, very wonderful. Because you see, ladies and gentlemen, everything God made beautiful in its place, in its place. But there are some things that you might think are beautiful that are not in the right place, and they turn out to be ugly. And becoming a man is an important thing after you have left your childish ways. You're supposed to leave those. So let's look and see, if you please, for the next few moments about the different stages of love that people grow through. Now, the first stage, and when I talk about are you old enough, I'm not talking about 18, 19, 20. I'm talking about are you old enough to know what it means to be married. And when you become old enough, when you put away childish things and you realize that you're a man and realize that you're a woman so ordained of God to be married. Now, let's talk about the first stage of love people go through. I went through it. Thank God I got through it. I was about 35 years old before I did, I guess. But the first stage of love is baby love, self-love. Because the first person a baby loves is not its mama. People say, oh, that baby loves its mama. No, that baby doesn't love its mama. That baby loves that baby. That baby's in love with that baby. If you don't believe that baby loves that baby, you wait and see when that baby's going to squall most for food and water. It's always going to be at 1 o'clock a.m., 2 o'clock a.m., and if that baby loved mama, he could hang in that crib till 8 o'clock a.m. But that baby loves the baby. That baby has the philosophy that most young couples have today. I want what I want when I want it. And if I can't get it, I'll squall to high heaven. That's the way most marriages mess up today. Either the bride or the groom, the woman or the man, have that baby self-love philosophy. I want what I want when I want it, and if I can't get it, I'll go home to my mama. I think it's about time for people, when you say I do to one another, you're supposed to say I don't to your childish way of living. That child love, that baby love, that self-love, it's flaked out many a marriage, and you know as well as I do. When you stand up in front of a preacher and you take one another for better, for worse, remember that when the worst comes along. It's amazing how well they enjoy the better, but let a little worse come, and they want to split, they want to call it off, they want to blame the marriage on everything, and they are not man enough or woman enough to be what they ought to be. But when you say I do to one another, you're supposed to drop your diapers and stand up like a man, because you're no longer a baby. You need to cut that umbilical cord and stand on your own 2 feet and not on mamas and daddies and uncles and aunts and neighbors. When you say I do to one another and a little trouble comes along, have enough fortitude and guts to face the situation and correct it, and don't run from it back to mama and run from it back to daddy or run from it down to a lawyer or to a psychiatrist. Just get over that I want what I want when I want it philosophy and grow up and put away childish things. How many believe this kind of preaching? Raise your hand. Let's see. I'll guarantee it's the truth. Some of you probably still married to a baby. She might be a 40-year-old baby, but she squalls just like a baby. This time is needed in America today for people to grow up. America needs some men. When a man says I do to a woman, he's a man. Now, he may not shave 3 times a day, but he's a man. If you're not a man, you ought not say I do. I stand amazed how so many people say, well, when I finish high school and 2 years of college, I'll be old enough to get married. You're not old enough till you grow up. You say, well, I got hair on my chest. Big deal. Some of the biggest babies I know are these hairy monkeys running around acting like they're men. I tell you how you prove you're a man is when you grow up and you put away childish things. Now let me give you the second stage of love that people normally grow through. Now these exciting stages, they're exciting if you grow through them, but they sure are a mess if you don't ever get through them. Second stage is parent love. It doesn't really matter whether your parents are good parents or bad parents. When you say I do to that woman, you're not married to your mom and daddy. You're married to that woman. When you say I do to that man, you have divorced yourself from mother and daddy. You have a parent love for them, but you don't have a husband-wife love for them because you're not married to daddy or mother. You're married to that man or that woman. Many a marriage today is all messed up when a boy can't get away from the mama image and the wife can't get away from the daddy image. She's trying to make her husband like a daddy, and the wife's trying to make her husband like her daddy, and the husband trying to make his wife like her mama. Man, one time my wife was cooking something, and she said, "Is this like your mama used to cook?" I said, "No, thank God it's not." I don't stop at any restaurant that says home-cooked food like mama used to cook. My mama couldn't even open cans real well. So I sure didn't get married to my mama. I married Joyce, and I never tried to compare her with my mother, because when I said I do to her, I put my love to that wife like God said you're supposed to do, and your love to that husband like you're supposed to do, and leave off that parent love. Now, you can have some of the sweetest mamas and sweetest daddies in the world, but they've got their place and you've got your place, and their place is not your place. And when mom and daddy come to visit you, you check that suitcase and be sure it's just a weekend bag. Mama pulls up with a trunk, you lock that front door and run out that back door, because you're not married to mama. Let her go home to papa and worry him some more. He's probably the one that said, "Go visit the children, honey, stay long." Let me tell you, that parent love is beautiful in its place. But when you leave that place, you leave that love. That doesn't mean you don't love your mom and daddy, but you're not married to your mom and daddy. You're married to that woman or to that man. Let me give you the third stage. This third stage is where a lot of it's at. That's called that gang love stage. Now, it's nothing sweeter than to be around a bunch of kids in Sunday school and church and see the little 8-year-old, 9-year-old boys. I like boys, they say. I'd rather sit with the boys. You're not going to put me by a girl. I don't even like to sit by girls. I might like to pull the hair and run, but I want to sit with them. I just don't like girls. Now, that's cute, isn't it? That's cute. But when they get 30 years old and rather be with the boys, that's ugly. That's ugly. I think that's what's wrong with a lot of our men today that are married. They're not men enough to face the responsibility as a husband and a daddy. They'd rather be out on the golf course Sunday morning, rather be down at the VFW club on a Saturday night, not with the wife, but with the men. I think that's one of the damning sins in marriages today, is men get more excited with the boys than they do with his wife, and there's something wrong when you get more excited out with the fellas than you do at home with your wife and your children like you ought to. Now, this doesn't mean I'm trying to discount the fact that you're not a real man, that you haven't grown up. I'm not talking about all these he's and she's and shims that we're developing in America today. I'm not talking about all these misters and misses and mistakes. It's terribly embarrassing on me, like riding out here the other day to the church here in town. I was pulling up behind a car and had this long-haired creature in front of me, and I thought, "Isn't that pretty? I'm going to blow my horn when I go by." And just as I got near it, I was going to give my horn a little toot, and it turned around, and she had a mustache all over her face. I said, "Oh, boy, I want to thank the Lord I didn't blow my horn, because if I had, he might have liked it." Lord, you have to watch out nowadays. We got so many female impersonators on Bourbon Street, they have to wear tags to keep them hustling one another. I tell you, it's something else. We need to grow up in this situation we're living in today. Now, today we seem to condone this perversion where the boys, if I like boys, leave me alone. I must be with the boys. God ordained when you grow up, you put away your childish gang love stage. It's just as upsetting for a housewife to rather be down at the bridge club with the women, or out at the garden club with the women, or down at the missionary union with the women, or prayer meeting with the women, and many times they ought to be at home with that man, taking care of that man like they ought to, and if they'd use that energy at home making their marriage work instead of out with all the sisters and the husbands in town, then you'd grow up and get out of that gang love stage. Man, we got so many people today that are hung up in this gang love stage, and God done ordained you to stay in that love stage. I think that's the reason so many men belong to civic clubs, belong to social clubs, hunting clubs, goose, got loose, moose clubs. They belong to everything, VFW, American Legion, leftists, rightists, Masons, Shriners. You know why they don't want to stay home with the wife? Because the wife knows what he's like, so he'd rather go down to the club so they'll think, "Man, he top moose. He's top goose down here. He's Mr. Big in our club." Let me tell you something. If you're not the man you ought to be at home, I don't care how big you are in your civic club, you are a failure as a man. if you're not the man you ought to be in your marriage, because that's where it's at, Junior. That's where it's at. You can go down and pick up somebody's tab at the bar. You can go down and buy somebody a steak, and they'll say, you sure are nice. No, you're not all that nice. It's those ticks and leeches and everything love that blood money you got, because that way they save their own because they can drain you dry. I'll tell you where you prove your manhood is when you're the man you ought to be in at home as a husband, as a daddy to those children, and as a husband to that woman you said I do to. How many like this kind of preaching? Raise your hand. Thank you, ladies. I appreciate you voting. This is where it's at. That's the reason Jesus Christ established a church. It can be a civic club where the husband and the wife and the children can come together as a family. You don't have to go your way as a man, and she doesn't have to go her way as a woman, and the kids don't have to go their way as children. The church is where the family of God ought to get together, and that way, that's where marriages are made holy. Let me give you another stage to go through. Not only that self-love baby stage, not only that parent love stage, not only that gang love stage, but there's another stage called others love stage. Now let me tell you something, you guys, you gals, some of you are sharp looking, 17, 18, 19, some of you sharp 15, 14, have to turn around and look at the choir because some of the sharp ones in the choir. Now when you're 15, 16, 17, 18, you dating pretty heavy, and you got a blue book, a black book, and it's just got a stable full of numbers. That's fantastic. Man, that's where it ought to be. Just have them calling, you calling, just waving at them. You have to have an appointment secretary to line up your date bureau. That's beautiful. But when the time comes, you say, I do to that man, or I do to that woman. You say, I don't to the rest of the crowd. Because that others love stage is before you're married and not after you're married. Most people need to realize where that's at. In Hollywood that laughs at it, and Johnny Carson and the night talk show artist on television laugh at it because they've run through 2 or 3 wives looking for 4 or 5 more. Let me tell you, just because they laugh at it doesn't mean God smiles at it, because marriage is still supposed to be holy in the eyes of the beholder, and God is the one who established holy matrimony. We need to recognize these stages of love. Here's another stage that you go through, and I hope and pray you'll end this stage, and that's God's ideal stage. And what's God's ideal stage? It's when you're old enough as a boy, old enough as a girl, to know God's plan for marriage is one man with one woman forever. When you get that old in your heart, that old in your action, then you're old enough to talk about marriage. But if you haven't grown through that I want what I want when I want it stage, you better not get married. If you haven't grown through that mother love and that daddy love stage, you better not get married. If you haven't grown through that gang love stage, you better not get married. Because when you're ready to say I do to that girl, you have to know how to say I don't to that gang, because you're not married to that hunting club and that fishing club. You're not married to that club downtown. You're going to be married to that woman till death do us part. When you grow through those stages, you're old enough to be married. And if you haven't grown through them, you're not old enough, whether you're 40 years old or 18 years old. Now for the next few moments, let me talk about my next phase of this marriage ceremony. And that's the fact, how to be happily married. You ready? How many want to know how to be happily married? Raise your hand, let's see. Thank you. Some of you wouldn't have voted if I'd held a gun on you, but that's all right. If you're happy already, there's another stage of happiness maybe I can tell you about. Now, when I read my Bible, I always like to see what God has to say. And I look in my Bible trying to find something to give me a base of operation for happy marriage. And I found in Philippians 4:8, where it talks so much about attitude. Say that word, attitude. Say it again, attitude. Many a man has lost his job because of a bad, sour, negative what? Attitude. Many marriages mess up because of what? Attitude. Many lives today don't ever succeed because of attitude. Now let me talk a little bit about 5 keys to happy marriage. First of all is the right mate. I think it's most important to be married to the right person. You say, well, I'm already married and I don't think he or she's the right mate. I'll get to that in just a minute. Don't leave them yet. Don't walk out on me during my message. You just hung together this long, wait a little while longer. Because we're going to talk about you in a little while. But we got a lot of folks in this building not married yet. And I believe it's important to let God direct you in your date life so that if your date life develops into a love life, it can be a later married life. I believe God should be included in all these things. I don't believe any saved girl or saved boy will want to date somebody who doesn't believe in their Lord. I don't see how anybody could be happy on a date with someone who's an antichrist, an anti-believer. You say, well, I'm trying to get them converted. Well, get them converted first before you flip for them and fall in love, because you can never be happily married when you're unequally yoked with an unbeliever. Doesn't matter how it looks outside, it won't be right inside, because the yoke is supposed to be even and not an uneven yoke situation. This right mate situation, I remember not too long ago, Rhonda Joyce Harrington, our oldest daughter, and Mitzi Jane Harrington, our youngest daughter, we were having a family discussion, and marriage came up when they were just in their early teens. And I remember Rhonda was dating earlier than Mitzi, of course, because Rhonda's the older of the two. And I remember how one night we were discussing marriage for her future. She said, well, Daddy, I'm just 14 or 15 right now. You think we ought to be talking about it? I said, I believe so. Because a lot of marriages have messed up in the future because they fell in love at the age of 15 and thought they were in love and left God out of this love life. So I remember that night we were talking about, because she was getting really eager then for boys, pretty heavy, you know, like girls do, and thank God for it. I was so proud she'd already grown through that. I'd rather be in the girls stage. She'd already kicked the girls out. She'd got more excited over, she'd dropped the paper dolls and everything else, man. She was wanting to know. I remember that night I said, honey, God knows where there's a boy for you. She said, when is he going to tell me, Daddy? I remember how she responded. It excited me. Why, it's natural for you girls to want to get excited over boys. And don't say, well, my daughter's just going through that puppy love stage. You better pray she won't wind up with a dog like you have. You enjoy the fact that they're going through that puppy love stage. And thank God it may be real to the puppy, so take care of that puppy, or it might bite you back later in life. I remember that night I said to Rhonda, let's pray for God to take care of your boy. And I did, and I remember when she prayed, this prayer I can talk so much about right now, because not too long ago I saw Rhonda say I do and heard her say I do. As her father, I gave her in matrimony to a young man named Chuck Kelly. And I remember that night we prayed, and I finished my prayer, and I heard Rhonda pray a prayer like this. She said, Lord, you heard my daddy tell me that you got a boy somewhere for me, Lord. Now, Lord, my daddy says you know where he is. And I don't know yet, Lord. But, Lord, would you take care of him and help his mom and daddy to raise him up like my mom and daddy raising me up? And then when the time comes for us to meet and get together and fall in love, would you handle that too, Lord? And I sure will thank you for it. Amen, she said. And I tell you, that prayer didn't ring so heavy then, but it did a little later when she went out to Baylor. And she'd been there just that freshman year and moved into the latter part of that year. Word started coming toward home. Daddy, we think the Lord's got him out here. We think we're meeting him, Daddy, the one the Lord's been taking care of. A little bit later on, she said, we have met, Daddy, and it looks like it's God's will for us to be in love. People say, you're silly talking about your little girls like this. This is not silly, man. This is where it's at, boy. This is where happy marriage is. Because if you can't be happy with your wife and children, don't tell me how happy you are downtown with the men and the boys and the girls and the ladies. Because where it's at is at home with that wife and those children. And I'll tell you, that boy she did fall in love with. And I remember when she told me later, Daddy, I've thanked the Lord many times for taking care of that young boy and having his mom and daddy raise him up. And the time did come for us to meet, and since then, that time has come for us to be married. People say, well, you talk about the right mate. Or what if you're married to a situation and you got the wrong mate, and things just not going too good? Have you ever stopped to think, were they going pretty good when you said I do? When you said I do, were you in love with that fella, that girl? Well, what's happened since then? Well, I don't know. I just don't believe I meant what I said then. I just don't believe I was in my right mind. Because I couldn't have possibly been in love with this. Man, I've had them sit in my office and I had to put a chair between them. Man, they'd sit there and they called each other things that the devil got embarrassed in my office and left. I tell you, if I had any demons left, they moved their letter. These people get mad, they fight. And you know what this woman told me the other day on Bourbon Street? She said, Reverend, I'm going to leave my husband. I said, okay, when you going to do it? And I'm going to leave him right now. I said, all right with me. I kind of advise like this because it really hangs them up. It blows their mind when I disagree with them. Because they think I'm going to say, oh, now let's sit down and pray about that. And when they say to me, one woman one day said, I'm going to get in my car and go up on a bridge and jump in. I said, come on, I'll drive you. You know, I try to be as much help as I can to these needy people. So this day, I said, now let's look at the reason you're going to leave your Tarzan. And she said, well, when we got married, I thought we loved each other. Said, but I found out now he's had an affair with another woman. I said, really? She said, yes, he did. I said, has he found out about yours? Ooh. She did a triple take. Of course, I didn't know whether she had or not. I just thought it'd be a good question. I have more fun with questions sometimes. How'd you know? How'd you know? Well, she said, well, I'm going to leave him. I said, all right, let's look and see what you're going to do after you ditch this one. You're going to try to find you a 19-year-old boy after you do? No, I better not pull that Miss Robinson stuff. I just don't believe I will. I said, well, you're going to try to find you a 39-year-old bachelor, somebody your same age but not married? No, I'd be scared of somebody 39 and still single. I said, no. I said, what are you going to do, break up a home and get another woman's husband? No, I better not do that. I said, well, what are you going to do? Find somebody else divorced like you so y'all can lick each other's wounds together? Well, I guess so. I said, well, now let's look. What's the reason you're leaving him? He's been having an affair with another woman. How many? Well, I don't know. One I know about. I said, okay, you're going to marry somebody else who's lived 19 years with a woman, been in bed with a woman for 19 years, and you're going to say I do to that kind of man, and you're fixing to ditch a man who just been in bed with another woman one time. I said, you sure got some dumb philosophy. You're going to get rid of one man because he's been in the bed with one woman at one time and pick you up an old recap that's been in the bed with another woman for 19 years. It's amazing how she looked at me and said, I didn't think I was going to get that kind of advice. I tell you, a lot of our marriages today could be fruitful, productive marriages if we let God help us repair something instead of replace somebody. Everybody wants to run when the boat gets to rocking. I'm going to leave him. I tell you, we need to repair some of these situations instead of replace. I want to thank the Lord that my wife helped repair me and not replace me, because if she'd have replaced me, I couldn't be up here preaching to you like I am tonight, because you wouldn't have respect for me like you do, because God's given me the victory and given me the answer. So I want to thank the Lord for that repair job that God gave me through her faith and through her prayers, instead of just splitting and leaving me hanging, letting somebody else call my children theirs and letting my children call somebody else their daddy, and her calling somebody else her husband. She hung in there with me, boy, and she repaired this thing, and God moved in and made a marriage holy instead of hellish. I want to thank my wife for it right now. Now, let me talk about another thing. How to be happily married. This next thing is your right attitude toward life. Let me say this about right attitude. That thing called attitude is something else. Most couples today are messed up because the attitude's messed up. They have 19 years of fun and excitement together and have 1 weekend or 1 week or 1 month of a mess, and they let that 1 month mess up the 19 years of happiness. You know why? The attitude's not right. They run around with a chip on their shoulder. They're running around like the wife loves me, myself, and I, and when her pride gets hurt and her feelings get hurt, well, I'm going to ditch this man. Think about those times when you stood together when your baby was born. Think about those times that you stood by the side of your child when it looked like you was going to lose this young boy or lose your young daughter. Think about the times when you stood with your mother or your daddy when they were going off into heaven. Think about the good times you've had and not the lousy times you think you've had. Right attitude, man. Have a right attitude toward life. Don't run around like the world owes you a living. Don't all the time squall about your marriage being a mess. No wonder the man can't love you, you love him. You're belly aching all the time. You're griping all the time. Grow up. Bless God, grow up. 90% of the women in America today are griping about the marriage. You ought to be praising God for the good times you've had and quit belly aching over the bad times you've had. How many are still glad you came? Raise your hand. One of you deacons, go get me some water, please. I'm about to run out of water. I've always wanted a deacon to hop up when I said so. Want somebody to check that water for me when he comes back. Right attitude toward life. You hear so many people say, well, marriage is a 50-50 thing. That's hogwash. Marriage is a 100-100 thing. Either one of the parties got 100% of that marriage, you'll never mess it up. But
When any marriage is 50-50, you halfway messed up already. Sure want to thank you for that water. Hand it here, deacon. God bless you. Lord, I hope I don't slosh you. There's enough water there to baptize 50 Methodists. Marriage. Thank you, Presbyterians, for that laugh. When I think about right attitude, we don't have room in our marriages for negativism. Think positive about your marriage. 100%. 100%. When that husband is 100% dedicated to his marriage, that marriage will never break up. When that wife is 100% dedicated, it'll never break up. And God's going to honor you 100% if you keep it like you ought to keep it. And sometimes it's a difficult road to hoe. But I guarantee you your crop will be good if you hang in there. Listen to me again. Right attitude toward children. You know, so many good homes have been broken up because the parents put too much love for the children and forgot to love the husband and forgot to love the wife. Man, I know many marriages all messed up today because the husband said to the wife, honey, let's go out, let's do something. Let's go to a ball game, let's have a picnic. Well, I can't go tonight, honey. I told Junior I'd stay home and watch him study. Well, listen, woman, let the dumb study by himself. You go with that man where you ought to be. You're not married to Junior. You're married to that husband. Treat him like a husband. You're not a babysitter. You're a wife. Don't forget you're a wife. Those children are just guests in your home. That husband's a permanent fixture. You take care of that husband. The children got to take care of them. I can't ignore my children. I'm not saying that. Grow up. But I'm saying if your children get more of your attention than your husband or your wife does, you got a messed up, flaked out marriage. And the only reason you're giving that attention to those kids is not because they want it, it's because you think you've lost it from your husband, and you got to have somebody love your ego so you won't feel so depressed all the time. Why don't you grow up? Why don't you put your love where it ought to be? Now, you can keep that man around the house as your husband. You can keep him around the house as your provider, but you're going to lose him as a man if you don't put your love where it ought to be. That's loving that man like you said you do when you said I do. All right, let me move on. Man, if I don't move on, this is going to be the longest record ever recorded. But there's so much to say about such an important subject as matrimony. A right attitude toward sex. Right attitude toward what? Say it with me. Sex. That's the weakest word I ever heard you say. Right attitude toward what? Sex. Say it again. Sex. I can see some of you little prime properly. Oh, he's going to talk about sex in church. Well, you're supposed to go to pool hall. He's going to talk about sex behind the sacred pulpit. Listen, God ordained sex to be sacred. God ordained everything to be beautiful in its place. And I guarantee if sex is not beautiful in your marriage is already out of place. Well, I just don't know. I've always been so fearful of sex. I just don't feel free with my husband. What you want to do, charge him? I just don't feel free. I just don't like to talk too much about sex. I just saw one of the deacons faint right here on the front. What do you mean? We need a right attitude towards sex. God's the one made us man. God's the one made us woman. God's the one ordained sex to be beautiful in its place. One man, one woman, husband, wife, forever together in the will of God. Praise the Lord. A lady the other day walked up to me. Oh, God, have mercy. She just walked all up to me. She just stopped and part of her didn't. This woman had a hangover and she wasn't even sitting down. Reverend, my husband's gonna leave me. I said, why did he wait so long? My husband doesn't love me anymore. I said, he ought to love you more. You got more to love. Oh, there she stood. Not one drop of makeup on a little chalky, peaked face. Trying to look religious. Don't blame that on God. Don't blame your little dried out face on God. Don't bring your little ugly face. I love the Lord. I don't smoke, drink, cuss, chew, run around, act up, go pitch, show my skirt's long. I love Jesus. I'd rather you smoked. At least I could smell you coming up on me. God ordained you to be beautiful, and he wants you to look good. That's the reason every time I pass a beauty salon, I take my hat off. Those beauty salons have saved many a marriage, boy. My wife goes twice a week now. I'm trying to book her in every day. This little woman standing there looking at me. I don't know why my husband doesn't love me. I said, I can tell you, you don't have much to love. Look at you. Look at you. That dress went out of style when Al Capone died. She said, had hair on her legs so long you could plait it. Oh, Lord. She said, my husband drinks a lot. I said, he's got to drink a lot so you look good to him. He's probably drunk. I mean, still glad you came, raise your hand. Hang in there. It'll get better after a while. Right attitude towards sex. Man, as a woman, take care of your womanhood. Take care of your job as a wife. Don't look like a dropout from some death colony. Be exciting to that man. That's what you use to get him. You better use it to keep him, or somebody else is going to get him. Amen? Whew. Let me get on another subject. I can stay on this one all night, because this is where it's at. I tell you, listen to a lot of this country music on the radio, you'll hear where it's at. The basis of all of it is this thing of attitude towards sex. God ordained sex to be beautiful. Don't you discount it because the world's made it ugly. All right, let me give you another thing. Right attitude toward that, and set a right attitude toward a goal in your life that might be bigger than both of you. Now, what I mean is this. Husband and wife need a goal that you're working toward that's bigger than both of you. And that goal ought to be God's will for your life. If you get the husband and the wife working toward God's will, both of them will be drawn together in their love life. They'll be drawn together in their work life. But if you don't have a goal any bigger than you or the other, you're going to pull yourself apart. Put God's will out here. Put his work out here. And husband and wife work toward that together. And when you're working toward the same goal, it brings you together and doesn't pull you apart. There are a lot of you right now tonight know what it's like to be happily married because you're both trying to serve the Lord in your own way, and it keeps you together. A couple the other day told me they started playing tennis more together. I said, well, good. Is that helping your marriage? Well, it's putting us together more. I said, are you more happy? No, we just fuss more. You need a bigger goal in life than a tennis ball. You need a bigger goal in life than a racket knocking a ball over a dumb net. You need something that you can work toward that's bigger than both of you. And the only thing bigger than us is God. Work toward what God wants you to be. Now listen to me closely. When I ask you this question, is your marriage on the rocks or is your marriage on the rock? I'm going to talk to you about that, and I want you to listen to me closely. When I say, is your marriage on the rocks, what does that mean? Talking about rocks, putting self first is a rocks. Putting parents first is a type of rocks. Putting children first is a type of rocks. Now let me say this. My daughter Rhonda, my daughter Mitzi, both are interested in helping people. My daughter Rhonda is studying speech pathology. She helps a lot of special educational needs among young people and some among mentally retarded children. And she tells me that a lot of families of retarded children, mothers and daddies, are separated. And I say, I wonder why. And I think the reason they are is because the mother or the daddy starts putting more attention toward that handicapped child than they do toward the husband and the wife, and the goodness of their heart toward that child has pulled the husband and the wife apart. Let me tell you something. You take care of that little boy. You take care of that little girl. You take care of that sick mother. You take care of that old daddy. But don't you let daddy or mama or boy or girl take the place of your love for that husband or your love for that wife. If you do, you're going to lose them. God didn't ordain your children to play the part of your husband or your wife. You just do all you can for those kids, and you do all you can for your parents, and God bless them, and I love them. But you're not married to mom and daddy. You're not married to your son and daughter. You're married to that man or that woman. Now, that's what rocks are. Now, what's a rock? People say, well, the rock is Jesus. No, there's a rock that he helped establish, but the rock is not just Jesus. At the beginning of this service, you heard me quote the marriage vow. When I said, will you take he or she to be your lawful wedded wife? After a while, we said, I do. Do you remember when you said that? Do you remember who you said I do to? Do you think you said I do to the wife? Do you think you said I do to the husband? When you said I do, you said it to God. You said it to God. Not to the husband, not to the wife. You promised God you'd stay together till death do you part. And if you don't stick together, you've lied to God. That's the rock that can hold a marriage together. Well, we just staying together because of our children. Well, you sure are dumb. If you've got to blame your marriage failure on your children, you're dumb. You didn't promise those children when you said I do. You promised God. Now that's a rock. When you got that kind of rock in your marriage, the gates of hell can prevail against it but not set it asunder. When you stand in front of a preacher or a priest or a judge or justice of peace, or even in Las Vegas at those chapels on every corner, marriage was ordained in heaven from God to you and me. When you say I do, you say I do to God. That's who you promise. I believe with all my heart that my wife would have left me years ago if she hadn't promised God she wouldn't. I believe with all my heart that Bob and Joyce would be a separated, divorced couple if we hadn't remembered what we promised God. I've always tried to do what I promise. I try not to promise anything I can't do. But I'll guarantee you when you say I do, you're saying it to God. And that's the rock your marriage ought to be on. Listen to this letter I received in the mail. Dear Reverend Harrington, I'm an 80-year-old man. I watch you on television. I'm writing to tell you that I want to be saved. Let me tell you why. Last month, the woman I was married to for 50 years died. For 50 years, I gave her great pain. Many times, I broke her heart. She had to take our children to church by herself. Many times through the years, I came home drunk and sometimes not at all. She should have left me a dozen times. Once I asked her why she didn't leave. She said, because I promised you and I promised God that I wouldn't leave. Last week, I found among her possessions a letter that was addressed to me to be opened after her death. She said in the letter, dear husband, when you read this letter, I'll be with the Lord. I wanted to thank you just one last time for standing by me and taking care of me for 50 years. During 50 years, you gave me all I asked and wanted, but one thing. And this last time, I'm going to ask you, don't weep for me, meet me. Don't weep for me, meet me. Well, Brother Bob, I did weep, but not for her, but for the time I lost. But praise God, I'm going to meet her one day. And that's what marriage is, a rock, a 50-year promise, a 50-year promise. That's what marriage is. Do you have that kind of marriage? If you don't, your marriage is on the rocks. and not the rock. Because the promise that keeps you together is what you promised God you'd do when you said, I do, to that man or that woman. Let's bow our heads as we pray.